You have the quiet confidence of somebody who has been there, done that, sucked the dicks, and can rate them on a 1 to 10 scale. You know? It's disarming.
I never forget a penis.
I find them incredibly forgettable.
I just, every last one I remember, because you don't forget something that looks like it should be hanging out of a shark's mouth, you know?
Back to sharks with you. Always the sharks. The shark. See, now we're bringing phalluses into this.
Did I tell you? Did I tell you what I found out about sharks? So a shark's brain neurosystem looks and is structured exactly like the female reproductive system. So I know you're going to want to look it up. Go ahead. And sharks produce a lot of squalene.
Okay.
Which is the same fluid that our vaginas produce when they are aroused and begin to lubricate. That lubrication substance is called squalene, which
that's also
sharks make a ton of.
In skincare.
So
I'm rubbing that shit on my face, not even knowing I had a natural supply. Why am I buying it like a chump?
You absolutely have a natural supply.
Yeah, shark brains look like a uterus with ovaries. That is absolutely. Yeah, that's wild.
Isn't that crazy? So you know,
when we say shark, we really mean like both the body and the brain, which is what our pussies bring to a table.
So I think it's like primitive memory, right? You've heard that theory of genetic memory. Mm-hmm. I think that my obsession with sharks is probably just some primitive memory of when I was one. And I was probably really hot and really sexy and really strong. And I probably had a lot of bucks hanging from the side of my mouth.
You were probably intimidating every other shark. The queen has arrived. Fall in line.
How you can tell the difference between a male and female shark is a female shark is an outie. It's like 2 butterfly wings. It looks very much like a human puss, to be honest. You can tell the male shark because they have 2 penises. You need to her with 2 dicks.
Fuck me twice or not at all.
Yeah, you need 2 dicks to fuck a shark. I think that's amazing.
All right, well, this is our daily dose of shark genitalia.
Listen,
another week, another insight into the bathing suit parts of sharks. That's what you can look forward to. Here on ILL REPUTE.
Look, we are a podcast.
Definitely a podcast. Sometimes it's shark pussy. Usually it's historical women or, notorious gender nonconforming individuals. Last week we gave a little primer on the history of horror movies in the 20th century to prepare us for our main discussion about the final girl, Sovereign.
Yes.
I'm so jazzed.
Yes.
But real quick, who the fuck are you?
Oh, I'm Sovereign Syre. You're fucking welcome. And I'm a writer. I am a stand-up comedian. I am a screenwriter. I am a podcaster, a painter, a candlestick maker. It's probably something I would be good at. I've never done it before, but I'd probably be really good at making candlesticks.
You're fucking good at everything you do. Like out the gate, you're so obnoxious. It's so rude.
I'll tell you what I can't do. I cannot parallel park if there is a man watching me. That is not
curse.
Cool.
It's a curse.
It's like if you see a woman parallel parking and you're a dude and you just stop and watch her, that's like opening the bathroom door and someone's in there, and instead of going like, "Oh my God, I am so sorry," you just keep the door open and just stare at them and all of their shame.
Stop to have a chat. Don't. Yeah. It's like I am either good or bad at parallel parking until I'm observed. It's quantum, We are very chatty today. Hi.
We are.
Hi. I'm Ella Darling. I am a porn performer and virtual reality pornographer and pioneer in VR. And I'm the world's first VR cam girl. And I'm a former librarian. And I'm a nerd. And I do robotics and coding sometimes. And I have home goods all in the shape of skulls and coffins. And that's who the fuck I am. Hi, I'm so happy to be here with you on ILL REPUTE. And real quick, before, lest we forget, I am
Yes.
recording in Austin, Texas, on the historic cultural grounds of the Tonkawa, the Comanche, and the Lipan Apache tribes.
And I am recording in Highland Park, Los Angeles, which is the traditional lands of the Tongva and Chumash tribes. And the original caretakers and stewards of the land, and a continuing vibrant cultural presence today across the nation. And so we like to acknowledge that this land was not ours to start. But now that we're here, we have a duty and a care and a responsibility to acknowledge where it came from and to do what we can to make all of that right. Even if it's just doing a land acknowledgement, it's still an acknowledgement of what happened. And that's important. It's a part of, they call it truth and reconciliation, like they did in South Africa. Like, you have to come forward and admit all the bad things you did before you can reconcile and squash it. So I think it's good that people are starting to do land acknowledgements, because I think, I
think it's very easy, and it's kind of the least thing you could do. And it doesn't have to end there. The fact that we do a land acknowledgement doesn't, but it's a start. And land acknowledgements were what brought the concept to the forefront of my mind. And I appreciate podcasters who came before me who have helped me sort of appreciate that. Hi, Salvi baby.
Hi.
You know what slipped my whole damn mind last week when we were talking about horror movies and we started to touch on The Final Girl? I was one. I forgot. I did a short film. It was a noir vampire film, and I played the Dame. And I, spoiler alert, I killed a vampire. The big baddie one, because I'm a boss bitch. It was cute. It was fun. It was called Shadows of Los Angeles. It was a couple friends of mine who made it. If you look really hard, you can find it. I don't know. It was cute. But yeah, I got to be a final girl.
I forgot till you said that right now that for Digital Playground, I was in a film for the one they had done for Halloween, and I got to play Linda Blair.
Oh my God.
The Linda Blair character. I got to be Reagan from The Exorcist, although it was not called The Exorcist, obviously.
It's probably the Sexorcist.
Or The Sexorcist.
That's too low hanging.
I think it was just something like Haunted House, or, it's Digital Playground, which is like, very high, like upscale kind of.
Very cinematic.
High production values. Yeah. I think it was, the director was someone that didn't last very long, that was like an auteur.
They never
And
do.
if you think,
like, if you want to be an artist pornographer, start a company and like make it your passion, because there can be some really, really great, incredible cinematic porn. I've been in a lot of them, but at the end of the day, like, you're gonna have to make what sells if you want to be hired by companies. You're gonna, if you want to be proud of your creative endeavor, own it, and that's really it.
Yeah. So we've already gone over what the listicle of what a final girl is. So we've gone over that. The previous episode I thought would just be fun to kind of just do a brief history of horror films, because I was interested. I realized I didn't know that history, and so I was interested. And I think it's a useful framework to look at how the final girl sort of departed from what had been pretty much an institution for almost 100 years, which is woman in peril, gets saved by guy, enemy is the threat, kind of pretty rote from the late 1800s when they first started making movies up until like the 70s. So significant, almost 100 years. There was one overarching plot, especially in terms of if you're just plotting gender roles.
Right.
So if you didn't listen last week, you can jump right in. You're going to be fine. The water's warm.
And there might be sharks in it. So
there might be.
To catch you up if you didn't catch last week, so the final girl is a trope and an archetype in horror films that really emerged in sort of the 70s and 80s with slasher picks. They typically are white, heterosexual, virtuous, both in terms of not having sex and not drinking or doing drugs. Typically, they're very, very much sort of the conservative idea of a good girl, the American girl. She usually triumphs after her friends have died, and she is the one who identifies the threat, maybe is a little bit invested in investigating it, and eventually she faces off with the big bad and wins, ?
Right. Sometimes the final girl dies, sometimes. But yeah, for the most part, last person standing. And there's somewhere you're kind of not sure. So like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, she gets in the truck at the end and gets driven off, but we see that the person driving the truck is from the family, right? So we don't know, right? So sometimes it's kind of like that. Even in Psycho, when the lead character's sister comes to investigate, she could be arguably sort of a final girl, you know, like coming to the Bates Motel to see what happened to her sister and kind of is the one that sort of pieces it all together. The final girl trope. Largely, this analysis is coming from a book called Men, Women, and Chainsaws by Carol J. Clover. It was published in 1992. So some of this stuff we're talking about, you're going to be like, well, that's not true anymore. Even she defines a final girl as something that emerged in films between the early 70s and kind of like the mid 80s. And that by the mid 80s and into the 90s, once the genre became aware of its own conventions and started to parody them, then it became less useful to do analysis because it's so self-conscious,
right?
That it would be a waste of time to do a deep dive and dig apart and see what these portrayals tell us about men and women, because once they're self-conscious and actively playing to those expectations, it's kind of done.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like once you know what a final girl is and you're playing into the rule, once there's rules and people start playing with those rules.
It's like observing an animal in the wild versus in a zoo.
How a bear behaves in an enclosure versus how a bear behaves in nature are going to be like just really different things. They are going to have some similar behaviors, but
they're both bears,
you know,
but
yeah. So Clover did not go through a history of cinema in her book. She jumped straight into what she was wanting to talk about. So we all know what a slasher film is. We all know what a horror movie is. And we all know what the rules are for surviving a horror film, which is generally be female, be white, be virtuous, be drug-free, and be smarter, and maybe have a boy's name and be kind of scrappy and be kind of different. She's not like other girls.
Oh, God, she's not.
Let's get into it. She was responding to sort of a kind of moral panic that was happening when video emerged. Before video emerged, in order to have distribution for movies, you had to go through the MPAA and it had to be rated, right? So everything from X to G, right? But it had to have a rating before you could get distribution.
I was about to say, I've never heard of G ratings, and then I realized, yes, I have.
If you've ever watched a Disney movie. Disney's big thing was Adventures of Natty Gann came out, and that was PG-13.
Ooh.
Oh, what happens at 13? Oh, I could have made a dark joke. I just won't. They're above the age of getting molested.
As soon as it stops being pedophilia and becomes ephebophilia, you're allowed.
Yeah. In England, they have a similar system. In the UK, they have a similar system. And when video became a thing, suddenly movie makers, if they were making something straight to video, they had a kind of get out of jail free card. They had a way to circumvent the system, which is they would just release it direct to video. You didn't have to have a rating for video. There's no like governing body over video distribution. If a store felt like carrying it, they just carried it. They didn't care if it had a rating or not. If people were asking to rent it, they would order it. The way movies like I Spit on Your Grave and Faces of Death, the way those came into the culture was through mom and pop video stores that were willing to carry whatever people wanted to watch. In the UK, it got so bad, they had a list called the Video Nasties. And I think at the end of the day, there were 74, 75 films that were on that list, most of them horror films. And they could be fined if you sold or distributed these videos in the UK. You could be fined or even maybe go to jail, I think. And a lot of that stemmed from every generation, there's some kind of like a jump, right? And so in the late 60s and early 70s, it was sex, premarital sex, it was divorce, right? And In the 80s and into the 90s, it was violence. These movies seemed to be competing with each other to see like who could be like more creative in the violence, more explicit, more disturbing, more graphic. There was much like the parental advisory stickers that we had to go on albums during the 90s. In the 80s, it was the movie version of the same thing, where it was concerned parents thinking that these films were disturbing, but especially because they were consumed primarily by adolescent boys. I'm going to start this with a direct quote from the text. Quote, "We may go a step further and suggest the qualities that locate the slasher film outside the usual aesthetic system that indeed render it, along with pornography and low horror in general, the film category most likely to be betrayed by artistic treatment and lavish production values, are the very qualities that make it such a transparent source for cultural attitudes towards sex and gender in particular." What do you think?
Okay, so like the more of an auteur you are and the more production value you throw into it, the sort of less actual value as a genre, as a participant in the genre. Is that kind of what she's saying?
What she's saying is because porn and horror have to be done on a budget, don't have a lot of cultural cachet, and don't have a lot of corporate oversight. So you're most likely to see the naked intentions of the creator. They haven't been muddled around. They haven't been interfered with. So you can look at the film and reliably say, this is what they wanted to make.
So low budgets lead to better and more clear authenticity.
Yes.
Which makes for an easier study of the human condition in the current zeitgeist when it was produced. Is that about it?
Yes. You're so smart.
Oh, I'll do in a pinch. The audience is largely adolescent men, though not the whole. But this obsession with the slasher of the adolescent male tells us something about what slasher films are meant to be teaching them. Are they meant to be cheering on the killer as he annihilates people, or the character at the end that finally destroys him? Are these young men meant to sympathize with a woman's fear, pain, and violation, or are they meant to be excited and titillated by it?
That was the question of the day. That was the subtext. Even the porn fears now, the subtext is think of the children and this idea that by simply consuming something, you can be dramatically changed by it. It's like the idea that if you watch enough gay porn, you're gay.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, in my case, that is true, but,
you're a unicorn. You're a squishy, unicorn.
Or just, like the same fears that are if you see gay couples on a sitcom, it's going to normalize it. And then people or children that weren't gay now suddenly are going to think they are gay. The same thing with like normalizing trans visibility, right? It's always the same argument that goes back to, it was probably Aristotle that was complaining that children shouldn't be exposed to the myths because the gods and goddesses just got up to so much nasty shit and were just fucking drama queens and rapers and murderers and jealous and like, because in the myths, right, the gods are so emotionally bankrupt.
The gods are such daytime TV.
This debate has, since people could write, they were writing fucking letters to the editor saying, think of the children.
Men commit violence against women no matter what kind of content they watch, no matter what their upbringing was. We could ban all media forever and men are still going to victimize women. Yeah, that's not addressing anything. That's just taking away art and shit that makes life fun.
This comes back to my theory around true crime and why women love it. I don't like watching women be hurt, but I love watching a man get hunted down and crucified for not cleaning up after himself. That's a very satisfying watch. My more serious response is that women tend to watch true crime because it reflects our lived reality as opposed to a fantasy. You can't assume that someone's watching something because they love what it depicts.
Which is actually the backbone of the Library Bill of Rights, because we're not going to judge our patrons based on the content that they choose to read and engage with, because there's any number of reasons why somebody might choose to. And it's really not up to us to determine that. That is part of their intellectual freedom as a citizen of the world. And it's not up to information scientists to make that determination for other people. I'm a perpetual librarian. I'm always a hoe, but like the librarian, that bitch will come out. I don't care if I'm horizontal and penetrated. You say something wrong, you say something incorrect, I will fact check your ass while I'm draining your balls.
Hey, you can be pinned down and penetrated, but you better not be tied up, because that will not get you distributed.
Yes, that's guys, obscenity.
We even have censorship in porn. I know that seems hard to believe.
Okay, but I need to do a quick aside. A lot of things we don't do in porn is because it would be considered obscenity, and you can go to jail for obscenity. I should have the court cases off the top of my head. I don't. I'm sorry. However, there are some things that are considered obscene in porn, which I find appalling. So, you cannot have blood in a porn scene. If there is blood, that's obscenity. God forbid I menstruate in a porn where I'm having sex.
Yeah.
God fucking forbid. How dare you, ma'am?
Yeah.
We would like to call you a MILF, but God forbid your body does the things that make it possible of attaining that status biologically.
Yeah. So
fun facts about pornography. There's stuff we cannot do because we will go to jail for it. And it is something that you don't have a solid list. We have a list of things that we don't do just to be safe. It is something that is left up to the belief and decision of the judge in whatever community the case is taking place in. So with internet pornography, this changed just a little bit, because now how do you argue for the sort of community standards of the internet? And do we want to dip that low as a society?
That joke kind of writes itself.
Yeah.
I think the community standards of the internet are best described by one of the most famous comments ever left on Pornhub under a scene.
Oh, God.
In which a man simply typed, "I'm tired of being horny. I just want to be in love."
Oh.
Like, he stopped jerking it and made this really profound statement. It got memed to high hell. And I would say that's the community standards of the internet is
men will speak to
gaping?
Pornhub comments before they will speak to a therapist.
Yeah. Gaping assholes and people that are tired of being horny because they just want to experience love, and they're looking for it in a Pornhub
in
comment
all the
section.
wrong places. The definition of the wrong place to look for love, I would say, is the Pornhub comment section.
Yeah. But this is actually a very relevant conversation, because horror and porn are very much side by side in this fight.
Yes.
And horror directors have to go through the same thing, which is there are standards, but there's not a list. And so they make a film and then they submit it to be rated, and they don't know what is going to be too much or what isn't, because it just depends on who's viewing it and who's voting and who's rating it. With a lot of these movies that are listed in her book, like Last House on the Left or like Schoolgirls in Chains, that there are 6 different versions of these movies because they've been cut so many different ways to be pushed through to get a rating. And so what becomes the real treasure hunt is trying to hunt down like the unrated, uncut version of these. Yeah. Which now with Amazon and everything else and eBay, much easier. But pre-internet, and even in the beginning of the internet in the 90s, like you could go into different chat rooms and you could say what you were looking for and you could get kind of bootleg copies of things. But I'd say like in the last 10 years, 20, like a lot of these films, like you can just go on Amazon. And so they don't have as much of like a cult status. Like Faces of Death, which I have seen when I was a kid, was like so taboo.
I thought it was just a website until you started talking about it as a film release. Because I just remember it from the internet.
They were originally films.
Okay.
And so part of the what gave them the status was their forbidden nature. And they created a cult following because it was like if you were cool enough to have like got your hands on a copy or your older brother had. And seeing these movies would become like a rite of passage because you had seen like the most forbidden. It was just like someone having porn that was beyond Playboy. Like if you had porn that depicted actual penetration, like a photo that showed actual penetration, like that was really wild.
Yeah.
That was crazy, right? And so it's kind of the same thing with these unrated horror films is they were just very graphic depictions of violence and rape. And when you go through the text, the notes they would get would be during this rape scene it needs to be cut by 4 seconds. During this stabbing it needs to be cut by 8 seconds. I mean, like the kinds of rules that would come around. So it would rarely be like a scene needs to be deleted. It would be that you would cross some invisible boundary that made it not even like unrated, but made it unwatchable, dangerous, right? Also going back to this idea that it was this fear that this was going to inspire people. And there were even a couple movies where a tragedy happened afterwards and the media tried to say that this killing was inspired. All of this was kind of culminating in the 80s. There was about to be a big culture shift. It was like this fear of contagion and this idea that we as a society had become so lost that why would someone even want to watch such a film, right? So that became the fear. No one was in charge of video cassettes. Anyone could film anything they fucking wanted to.
And we've got this
put it on a tape.
Straight to children, straight to videos, straight to children. Yeah, absolutely.
Everything seems so violent and everyone's having sex and the families just doesn't exist anymore. Everyone's divorced and like these movies, and why are little kids watching these brutal, violent movies? Like who would watch that? Who would like there was just this kind of pearl clutching.
Yes.
Around the fact that things were changing.
Yes.
And it's very much how like what's happening today with the internet and these fears around chat rooms, sexual grooming, sex trafficking, kids watching porn. It's the reaction is really not about those things. The reaction is about that the culture has changed in a very significant way.
Yes.
It's like the whole order got changed and people feel scared.
The world is scary and shitty, and there's no shame in feeling some feelings around that. I think a lot of people, if they acknowledge that concern, it's acknowledging a weakness. And so instead of advocating for their own going on in their brains and looking out for themselves, they craft a narrative where they are the salvation of children. Because who could argue with somebody who wants to save the children?
Exactly.
What do you want to do? You not want to save children? So you want to kill children? So are you a baby killer? You know?
I also want to say, clearly the biggest cultural shifts have come with technological advances, but not the technological advances of science, the technological advances of culture. First, it was films. The first round of censorship, right?
She means films.
Like the Hays codes. So I was like, oh, movies, because everyone's going to it. It's really exciting. And for a lot of people, you know, it was the first time that they were exposed to images of exotic locations and things like that. And it like made the world bigger. And that was kind of reigning supreme. And then television, it's like in your house. You don't even leave the house and you don't go to a movie house. It's right there. And that created its own changes, right? Like in the 50s. Then you've got video, and now you've got internet. But every time there's an advance in like how we are able to consume entertainment leads to a lot of social changes. Yeah. I would argue.
Yeah. I stand by that. Will you tell me about the slasher film and sort of how that genre was defined?
So the first real slasher film was Psycho. It had a female protagonist that was sexually active and attractive.
Dangerous.
She's killed by a knife. Yeah. Oh, super dangerous. They're not called bombshells for no reason. Okay. You're going to be collateral damage. So, female protagonist, attractive, sexually active, killed by a knife in a sudden attack. And this is really key. And from her point of view, she's killed outside of her home. Mm-hmm. So the success of Psycho influenced filmmakers to repeat it, and the birth of the slasher film began, finally being fully born in the 70s with the release of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and then fully refined within a few years by the film Halloween. Broadly speaking, a slasher film involves these components: killer, location, weapons, victims, shock effects. When all of those are present in the way we're about to present, you got yourself a slasher and a final girl.
In slasher films, the killer is almost always someone in gendered distress or with a demanding or conspicuously absent mother. There's rarely any actual rape in slasher films, but rather violence is seen as an equal alternative to sex. These characters are trapped into boyhood, and the horror film is often the precursor to the adult film, a graduation. While some killers are half normal and half monster, in most slasher films, the killer is just that and nothing else, and is practically indestructible. Freddy Krueger is so fucking OP, it's ridiculous. That's probably part of my crush. Like, I can't ruin him. This can be seen as a kind of allegory for the nature of the world. To be alive is to be in a hostile environment. We must all kill something so that we may live, whether it be plant, animal, water, or air. Everyone must become a killer to live.
That was kind of me getting a little philosophical.
Yeah, I had it. You don't say, Savi.
I can't say that's Carol J. Clover's analysis. That little tail end sentence was me picking up what she was putting down, and I was like, let's just take it further. But she was basically saying slasher films are what teenage boys watch before they're old enough to get porn.
Yeah.
And it captures an audience kind of in an in-between phase. Like, they're not quite sexually active yet, but they're curious about it. But they're also kind of scared and young and vulnerable and figuring out what adulthood is gonna look like. They're not there yet, but they know it's something they're gonna have to navigate, and that can be liberating but also scary.
Well, adult masculinity is presented as a combination of sexuality and violence. You're strong and violent towards, you're the protector, you're the provider, all these things. And who are you protecting and providing for? The person you're fucking, right? Who you are trying to impregnate and, go forth and multiply with. At the end of the day, when, I'm not a young man, never have been, never will be. Thank God. But when you think about the brain of a young man, like, those are the facets of masculinity that are being put forth by a lot of people in the media, especially these days.
We're going to talk about it in a minute, but it's interesting to note what happens to strong, brave men in slasher films and what happens to men that try to rescue people. But I think that this is an interesting thesis. What is it about these films that is particularly appealing? And this goes back to her thing about the fact that movies are replicatable because each role is so prescripted. So her further theory is that you cannot define gendered characters by the sex of the character because none of them are fully rounded real people. They are all representatives.
They're constructs.
Of something. Yes. Whether or not the lead is a girl or a boy as they're being played is kind of irrelevant. It's how their behavior is coded that is going to tell you if they represent the masculine or the feminine. So a great example of that is a movie I watched this morning. And if you haven't seen it, you need to watch it for the last 2 minutes alone. It's so good. But Sleepaway Camp.
Oh
Sleepaway
my
Camp,
God. The Sleepaway Camp films were my shit when I was a kid.
Okay.
To this day, I can't be in an outhouse and not imagine being down in there and then fished out and put in a cabin and covered in leeches. Because Blair from that film or one of the sequels, that was her fate. I even remember her name.
But you've seen the first one.
I've seen several of them.
Okay.
When I was a kid, so it's been more decades than.
Do you know? Okay, the last 30 seconds.
Tell me, I don't remember that. It's been decades. I don't remember women I've had sex with on film.
I don't want to. Can I spoil a movie that's like 40 years old?
Okay. If you don't want to spoil it, I'm gonna jump forward. Just jump forward. Just use your little app and do your little thing and protect yourself, your ears from this spoiler of a decades old film.
So the plot of the movie is there's a boy and a girl, and their parents are two gay men, and they are in the water playing across the street from a camp, across the lake from a camp. And they are swimming in the water, and they are killed by a speedboat that like goes off the rails. Like that's how the movie opens. Mm-hmm. And then you flash forward like 8 years. And it was a boy and a girl, and then like the two dads. And there was like one survivor, and it is this girl. So this girl named Angela. So Angela now lives with her aunt and her cousin, who's a boy. And the cousin and Angela are very close, and they're about to go off to sleepaway camp. Mm-hmm. And through most of the movie, Angela's just like very quiet, kind of shell-shocked, like she had survived this crazy accident. And she gets bullied a lot because she reads as very autistic. Mm-hmm. And throughout the course of the film, one person after another that has bullied her or whatever is killed in some kind of quite theatrical but bloodless way, which was an interesting choice. And we'll get into why I think that's so interesting in a minute. Okay. And then as the violence, as the death toll kind of ramps up, mm-hmm. she develops this romance with another kid at the camp. And they're kind of having a little summer, just like, fling. You know, they're just like, but he tries, and they're making out, and he tries to like take off her top, and she really freaks out and like runs away. But they work it out. Like he doesn't understand what spooked her so much, since like, and they're both like 13, mm-hmm. like they're not. And the killing continues, and then long reveal is at the end, a bunch of kids have been killed. The cops come, and everyone's just looking for whatever kids are left, kind of wandering through the woods. And they come upon Angela, and she's naked, and she's sitting down with her back to them, and she's cradling the decapitated head of her love interest.
Wow.
And they call out to her, right? Mm-hmm. And she stands up and turns around, and she's got this haunting look on her face. It is like iconically, it was like the most beautiful image I've ever seen mm-hmm. in a film ever.
Yeah.
She's got blood all over her chest. She's holding a knife. She's got this frightened look on her face, and her mouth is open, mm-hmm. and but all that's coming out is like guttural animal noises. Yeah. And as the camera pulls back, we see that she has a penis.
Wow.
And then through a flashback, we see that when she was sent to live with the aunt was just like a weirdo and basically made her dress and act as though she was female.
Wow.
So
that's a lot. I don't remember any of that from watching it as a kid because I had no concept. I had no framework to understand any of that, you know? So, and yeah. I think when I look back, I think I probably got really into Sleepaway Camp 2 and 3, where I think, you know what, I don't remember. So I'm not going to talk out of my ass because I don't want the corrections.
Watch it later. And I watched it this morning because Josh said I should. And it kind of is thesis. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's sort of like attained thesis. So the first thing is the killer. Mm-hmm. The killer must be essentially a force of nature. They're very rarely given any kind of a motive or any kind of substance at all.
And they yes. can work beyond it, beyond the limitations of their prey. They are supernaturally able.
And that's why they're relentless, right? Because they can't be reasoned with. There's no other way to escape them than to become a killer yourself and kill them. They can't be arrested. They can't be talked to. None of that can happen, right? And so that's what makes them a particularly frightening enemy, because there's no other way for it to go down. Which takes us to the second thing that is required for a slasher, which is what Clover calls the terrible place. So the terrible place is usually like a house or some kind of underground tunnel. It can be the spaceship in Aliens. But think about all the horror films that you've seen, especially the final confrontation. They're going to a house, they're going to a camp, they're going to a cabin. They're going someplace away from home. And a lot of times it'll even have womb-like imagery, like underground tunnel systems, a haunted hospital in a zombie film. The action almost never takes place within one's own home. It's usually that these young people venture into a terrible place and also wander into the terrible place thinking at first that they found a place of greater safety. And then there's this reveal like, haha, the killer's here. Right? Like in Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, like the last scene you described.
And with Sleepaway Camp, me and Josh were just talking about it. What's striking about the last scene is it's so beautiful and so haunting and so bizarre. And when I was Googling around, so many write-ups that are just talking about what is called, I think it's called like the impossible image, or it's something image that is part of horror films where it's not about in it would be with the first time when Georgie puts his hand into the sewer and the clown Pennywise's mouth opens up and it's just like full of sharp teeth. Yeah. It's not necessarily the sharp teeth so much as it is that it's unexpected and it's not right.
It's uncanny.
Right. Yes. And that's the thing with the Sleepaway Camp image. It's jarring. It's what am I looking at?
It shakes your expectation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it's not just that she has a penis. It's also that they made like a lifelike mask of her, the actress, and then they put it on a male college student that was slightly built. It was 1983, so their ability to do like intense special effects just wasn't there.
Right.
It's supposed to be just straight up a genetic boy that is not trans, right? That's been forced to live a certain way by a psychotic caretaker. Another thing that she talks about in The Terrible Place is, and this goes more into this metaphor of, adulthood, is that there's almost always a scene where the final person thinks they found a place of safety and they're in a small space, right? And the killer's out there looking for them. And then boom, a hatchet or a knife like penetrates through the door. It's very sexual.
Yeah.
And this usually is the moment in the film where heretofore the final person has either evaded capture by running or by hiding. And this scene in the film is always pivotal. This first sight penetration is when the killer is present and finally there's no other way to escape than by direct confrontation, which can very often be seen as a metaphor for passing out of adolescence and into adulthood, when action must be taken and something must be decided.
Yes.
And a fundamental change is now about to take place.
Yeah.
So that is another element of the slasher.
You can no longer lean into the safety of youth that you have found so much comfort in. You now must cross the threshold into adulthood because otherwise you will die.
Yeah, exactly.
Which also brings us to weapons. So weapons are a very big part of slasher films, but most slasher films are very pre-technological. So there may be guns in the film, but they almost always fail. What is really key here to this kind of film are penetrative instruments, knives and saws and needles, picks, axes, and stuff like that. They're very phallic extensions because they require a close kill, and to kill, they penetrate flesh. They also serve to open up the body and reveal what's inside, once again, very sexual, another metaphor for sex, but it's also existential because when we're opened up, we often die as a result, and we resist that opening. And being opened up as a victim, whether it's physically opening someone's chest cavity or forcing them to mentally open up and confront their own traumas, both of those can be equally devastating and challenging. But
Yeah.
the visuals in slasher films are straight up using a phallic object to open the unmarred flesh and penetrate.
And often, just like in Sleepaway Camp,
Mhm.
the final scene is figurative and literal.
Mm-hmm.
She's holding the knife like she got a dick.
Yeah.
Like she's a man now.
Mhm.
Only in Sleepaway Camp, it's doubly so. It's very in your face.
Mhm.
Let's get into victims and how all of this comes together. There are multiple victims, both male and female. They are usually teenagers and not adults, but not always. The main reasons that they might be killed is for having illicit sex. The next is that they stumble into a terrible place.
Mhm.
What remains true, however, is that boys are killed for having illicit sex or making a mistake. Girls are killed for having illicit sex, making mistakes, and also for simply being female.
Mhm.
This is notable in the film The Last House on the Left, in which one of the killers is tasked with going out on the street to find some girls. You don't usually see horror movies where someone's just killing men because they're men. Often in horror films, women are killed because the killer just hates women.
Mm-hmm.
So part of it is that if you watch horror films and slasher films, when men do try to rescue the woman, they're usually killed in performing acts of like heroism
Mm-hmm.
that are just like misguided or just like they're not equipped. So that's also interesting, is that men that try to do the right thing are often treated as stupid
Mm-hmm.
or ineffective, right?
Right.
So it's like all the men around the final girl are ineffective to help her,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is an interesting twist. So I just wanted to do like a side mention to this because I think we could do an ill repute at another time
Mhm.
about the genre of rape revenge films, which I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's its own subject, but let's touch on
That-
it
but
because it's
it-
relevant.
Yeah. So, so the killer is, almost always a man.
Mm-hmm.
So except for in the rape revenge film.
Yes.
Now in the rape revenge film, the killer is a woman and the men are killed just for being men.
Mm-hmm.
So there is one genre that does like very comfortably flip that around where
Yes.
like I spit on your grave. Like, but even then, usually it's not all men. It's the woman going back to exact revenge on the specific men that
we'll come back to this
perpetrated.
later.
So some would argue, i.e. Carol J. Clover would argue, that the female in these movies represents adolescent boys
In slasher film.
in slasher films, and that the killing of the female represents growth from a boy to becoming a man. Like that is the transformation. So let's get into her ideas around gender in the final girl. Ella?
The final girl, finally. The final girl is the one presented as the main character from the start. She's nerdy. She's teased. She's sweet. She's not sexual. She's either a virgin or just disinterested in finding a partner. What differentiates her is that she pays attention to signs of trouble from the outset, and she's the one who realizes what's happening. While her friends are killed instantly, she is the one that figures everything out and lives with the knowledge of all that has happened and that could happen to her, so she has a unique terror. The final girl is also usually resourceful in a pinch and mechanically inclined in some way. Going back to Nightmare on Elm Street, our girl started reading a book about improvised booby traps, basically. And
Yeah.
kind of a badass. Loved it. Want that book personally. She's boyish. She usually has a boyish name. And she's meant to be a stand-in for an adolescent boy, which is interesting because heretofore we assumed boys relate to the boy that they see. Girls relate to the girl. There's a princess, that's the girl. There's the hero, that's a boy. It's never a girl.
Yeah.
You know? But here, her thesis is that young men actually identify with the final girl, which is fascinating.
The point of view is what tells you what you need to know. So even in a film where you're watching a woman be brutally raped, the camera will not be really on the rapist.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not erotic.
Mm-hmm.
It will be kind of from the POV of the victim.
Mm-hmm.
It's meant to take the viewer to experience the humiliation and the violation, not to be watching it and jerking off. In slashers, the perspective you see is the victim.
Mm-hmm.
In Psycho, she's being stabbed. She doesn't even see, right? The focus is we see her face.
Mm-hmm.
We see her terror. Mm-hmm. We see her blood in the shower drain, right? Like, we don't see her from like the killer's point of view. It's like we see her confusion and the shower curtain, and it's just like in her face and what's going on. So that's essentially her theory. But she goes on to say it has to do with the way that things are coded. So she would argue that the killer is actually coded female.
Interesting.
Because rage and destruction and all of that and obsession, those are coded as feminine traits. That kind of emotional looseness. While murder itself is coded, violence itself is coded male, but the kind of just unfettered, like emotional id kind of thing is generally coded female. And like the scrappy, mechanically inclined final girl is actually coded very male. So her argument is more gets into this realm. So if we can decide that, what do we really think about gender differences? And what are our expectations of gender if we start to look at it that way? And then we watch the horror film. Now, what is it telling us?
When we think of male violence, we think of military. We think of men fighting men and some weird rules of the game. And when we think of raging, reactive violence, we associate that with women. And I wonder if it's because we've prescripted so many approved forms of violence for men, for young men. With women, when we break, just like you were saying earlier, I don't know if it's going to be included or not, but like you have a very long fuse, and once it's done, it's done. You can tolerate a lot, and this is true for me too. I can tolerate so much shit, but once I'm pushed up against a place of simply no more, all bets are fucking off. I will hurt your feelings. You can try to hurt me physically. You will never recover from the mental harm that I will cause you when I read you flat and upfront and exactly who the fuck you are. That is my violence. My violence is not physical. My violence is giving you the honesty that I've protected you from.
Right.
Anyway.
Oh, that's good. And she argues that the killer almost always represents like the mother figure, because part of growing up is you have to sort of escape your parents. And what teenage boys have to escape is their bond with their mother. That severing that has to happen is scary. It's really interesting because horror films seem to flip the script in terms of, in most films, the villain represents change and the hero represents the status quo and restoring the status quo, right? In horror films, it's the reverse, where the killer represents, in many ways, the way things are, and escaping is change. The character is fundamentally changed afterwards, right? They've gone to the dark place and they've come back with secret knowledge. The killer also represents almost always gendered distress, is how she describes it, but like Psycho, in Sleepaway Camp, or they've got like a weird relationship with the mother, and it's Michael Myers catches his sister like hooking up with her boyfriend in the parents' bedroom. She keeps saying it's very Oedipal, right? There's a lot of nodding to absent parents, dead parents. Almost always the killer has confusion around sexuality, but more importantly, gendered sexuality.
Which is interesting because most Disney films have young female main characters who have lost their mother. There's a huge absence of maternal figures in Disney films, and yet those young women do not go forth to murder. Wild. If you put horror and pornography side by side, what one might say is that the men or the killers have a lot of mommy issues. But mommy issues is not a phrase that we reach to. It doesn't roll off the tongue like daddy issues, which is common parlance to discuss women who consent to a career in adult film. I must have daddy issues. When it's presented as these men who were killers and murderers and insanely overpowered, they are suffering from the results of what their mother did or didn't do to them. So we don't use the phrase mommy issues. We think of them as traumatized by their upbringing with their mom. Daddy issues usually means, her dad walked out early or abused her or her mom. The same shit for young men and the trauma they can experience at the hands of their mothers is not considered mommy issues. That's just that boys will be boys.
If you look at the popularity of MILF material, it's mommy issues all the way around.
Yeah, I mean, it is very predatory.
I agree. I don't like the MILF category because I think it's very damaging and harmful to women because it teaches boys that there is any world in which a woman is fantasizing about taking care of a man.
True, and I love the joke, but also it further dichotomizes female identity, especially in porn. We've got, the virgin or the whore, barely legal or MILF, the standoffish, unfuckable lesbian.
The biggest search terms for the last 10 years, number one is lesbian, which tells me everything I need to know about male sexuality. They only get turned on if they know you don't want to fuck them.
If you're explicitly not invited, there's simply no room at the inn for your dick here. All of the rooms are fully filled.
All of the holes are filled.
And there's no acrylic nails on any of them in a perfect world.
But see, she brings up porn in this book a lot. Horror and porn, they're direct microcosms of the culture. If you want who we are as people distilled down to its bare essence, looking at what's most popular on Pornhub or going and looking at what horror movies are really popular right now is going to tell you everything you need to know about our anxieties and our desires. We can say all this stuff about the final girl represents the adolescent boy, but it must be said the victims are nearly always young, beautiful women. So it's not like these aren't misogynistic films, right? We can't overlook the fact that they involve a lot of exploitative imagery of young women being violated. We can't skate over that. Here are some quotes from horror directors. Horror director Dario Argento said, quote, "I like women, especially beautiful ones. If they have a good face and figure, I would much prefer to watch them being murdered than an ugly girl or a man." And Brian De Palma said, "Women in peril work better in the suspense genre. It all goes back to the perils of Pauline." Those were the old movies where the girl's tied to the railroad tracks and Snidely Whiplash is there and then Dudley Do-Right will come in and save her just in time. They were old silent films. It all goes back to the perils of Pauline. If you have a haunted house and you have a woman walking around with a candelabrum, you fear more for her than you would for a husky man. Which goes into, if you're going to make a good horror film and the idea is to scare people, it makes sense that you would use a woman instead of a man because people are much more uncomfortable seeing women in danger.
Right. Brian De Palma, if you are not familiar, he directed Carrie.
So he did the one, the name is escaping me right now, but it was the one with Michael Caine where he's a psychiatrist and he's a cross-dresser. And there's a really famous scene where a woman goes to a museum and a man sits down next to her and she leaves a glove and she gets up to leave. And there's this really long sequence of him chasing her through the museum, trying to get her attention to get this glove back. ends with them taking a cab together, going home and fucking. Really iconic.
Is it Dressed to Kill? I think.
Yes, I think that's it. Yeah.
On that same note, Hitchcock, during the filming of The Birds, said, "I always believe in following the advice of the playwright Sardou." He said, "Torture the women. The trouble today is that we don't torture women enough." He said with his full fucking chest. Another thing he said, which is not in the script, but I happen to know offhand, blondes make the best victims. They're like virgin snow that shows up the bloody footprints.
I mean, you are kind of a final girl, Ella.
We went on vacation a couple years ago. We went to Tulum to celebrate some shit and just love on each other and be besties.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what you said to me?
What did I say?
You said, "I am so rapeable." You're right.
Yeah.
You could have been fucking anyone. And I would have just been, it's you. I think it's fine.
No, what it was you, ma'am, had not locked the door. I had gone off and came back and you didn't lock the door. You are highly rapeable. Get it together.
Because you would come in and I didn't even know you were here through that unlocked door.
Yeah.
So you could have been anyone.
And you were just like, "Is it you?" And that's when I was like, "Man, you are highly rapeable." Like, I am just like, you've got 30 seconds before you have a knife in your dick. That's what I shout out when I hear something go bump in the night. I'm immediately, I'm armed. And I wish a motherfucker would. So to further Clover's point, when critics objected to Halloween by saying that it basically punished female sexuality, the director, John Carpenter, responded.
He said, "They completely missed the boat there, I think, because if you turn it around, the one girl, who's the most sexually uptight, just keeps stabbing this guy with a long knife. She is the most sexually frustrated. She is the one that killed him. Not because she's a virgin, but because all that repressed energy starts coming out. She uses all those phallic symbols on the guy. She and the killer have a certain link. Sexual repression." Which is my biggest bugbear about society, is sexual repression. Repression in general, but especially around sexuality.
And that's the thing. Sex and death really come together. Clover kept pointing out, it's not that violence is a replacement for sex. It's that violence is as good as sex. It is a symbolic thing. Every violent scene you see in the movie, you should see it as a sex scene, essentially. Through using violence, they're having tons of sex. When the final girl stabs the killer, when she holds up the knife, she has become male, in effect. She has become an adult. All of the slasher films seem to be about the need to kill off the parents to become sexually free. The emotions required of terror, fear, shaking, begging, are coded as feminine. So while the horror directors could use male victims, if they want to maximize terror, they will use female victims. Hence the need for a character that is female that also has male traits. Torture the women means torture the audience. This might account for female fans in the reverse. They identify with the killer, who is coded as masculine but displays feminine rage. Let's briefly talk about the male final girl at Nightmare on Elm Street and how that was received.
I actually watched that one the other day.
It's supposed to be about him being gay. The idea is that Freddy Krueger is homosexuality. I'm just going to run through this really quick. If you haven't seen Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, the film follows Jesse Walsh, played by Mark Patton, not Mike Patton, who's also kind of coded a little gay and is really hot. Anyway, Mark Patton moves into the Elm Street house previously inhabited by Nancy Thompson from the first film and begins experiencing nightmares and is increasingly tormented by Freddy Krueger. While the film retains elements of the classic series, it introduces unique elements that have sparked debate and interpretation. They've done a whole fucking documentary on this movie. One of the central themes explored in Freddy's Revenge is the idea of repressed homosexuality. Jesse's character experiences a profound internal struggle throughout the film. He exhibits behavior that can be interpreted as being at odds with traditional gender norms and expectations. For instance, He shows fear and discomfort with his attraction to his female friend, Lisa, and he often appears anxious and vulnerable. So we're not saying that that's gay, but we're saying that's coded as feminine. Being insecure around a love interest, feeling vulnerable and anxious, we associate those with female traits, especially in the 80s. That's how he's like a girl. What they would say in the 80s, he would be like, he's coded as a pussy, a sissy boy, you know?
Yeah. In the film, Freddy Krueger seems to physically manifest through Jesse, implying a kind of possession. Freddy's glove even emerges from Jesse's body at one point. This supernatural possession has been analyzed by some as a metaphor for the suppression of Jesse's true self. There's a memorable scene set in an S&M club that Jesse visits, which has been seen as symbolically representing his inner turmoil and desires. I knew that he was supposed to be coded as gay, but he was just coded as, I mean, this was in the 80s when that film was released, and I am watching it in the year of our Lord 2023, and I am familiar with a different kind of masculinity and young man.
Same. It was really not received well, and the lead actor in it felt that it destroyed his career. He was gay and is gay. He's still alive. He is gay. And I don't know if the screenplay was written to be queer. Mm-hmm. There are certain elements of the script that lead me to that conclusion.
Look, I had a hard time with this. And I think that things that were queer coded in the 80s feel super, super straight today.
I don't know. I think the leather bar scene.
Okay, well, yeah,
that's pretty fucking gay. Like, you know.
I just, when I watched it, I had a really hard time, even though I knew, having done some research, that like, okay, this is a final boy and there's some homosexuality undertones. He rejected the advances of the main girl who was flirting with him. He went to a place that was clearly a gay bar. I felt like I was not watching a gay young man struggling with his sexuality. I felt like I was watching a young man who is struggling with existence because people keep dying. And he's living in this house that's clearly haunted, which even if nobody was dying, that enough. I did not read that character as gay.
I didn't either until I watched the documentary about this film.
Okay.
And then I was like, oh. But if I'd been watching it in the 80s, I would have 100% picked up on that.
Yeah.
Right? And like that,
I know what gay coding looks like in 2023.
Yes. And that's her point, is that these movies become snapshots of the time. Mm-hmm. It's like the era in porn when romance porn was really popular. That can tell you about what was going on culturally at the time. This was suddenly really popular, and it was a response to the proliferation of gonzo porn. Mm-hmm. The women starting to talk more about their sexuality in the open, and women started talking about liking to watch porn. Mm-hmm. And there was suddenly more content than you could ever watch was created to fill that market of women
watching
for
porn. Women, which
in feminist so porn, many ethical porn, whatever you want to call it.
Ethical feminist porn. You're telling me, a woman, that the way that I enjoy my sexuality is incorrect because men watching it. But you're making porn and you're not paying me a fair rate to do porn for you, which is so unethical. Suck my whole dick. Anyway.
End rant.
Here's why I didn't find him to be gay coded. I thought he was bi. And they didn't know what bisexuality was back then. They thought it was a construct for people to pretend not to be gay.
I have a counterpoint to you, actually.
Ooh, okay.
So this came out in the 80s. Mm-hmm. What else happened in the 80s? Around
AIDS,
to gay people.
Yeah. The AIDS.
Pre-AIDS. Bisexuality among men was much more common and openly discussed. That was a product of the Summer of Love in '68 and the sexual exploration that people went on throughout the 70s. Key parties, swinging, hookups, singles bars, that kind of thing. And it was more fluid. Men were bisexual. What happened is AIDS. And when AIDS happened, that immediately how do I put this? Women were seen as especially vulnerable to men that were dishonest or that had sex with other men. They represented a very specific danger to women, because now it wasn't just that they could rape you, it's that they could rape you and give you a virus that would kill you. Men that were bisexual very quickly packed that shit up, and that it was private because they didn't want to be seen as dangerous. Gay people had been weird, different, homo, queer, fag, like all of that stuff, right? But when the AIDS virus happened, they became dangerous.
Yeah.
So bisexuality in men used to be more common. I think we're coming back from that because they have found a way to make AIDS no longer a death sentence. You can take a pill every day and
either never get it or treat it. You can be at absolute viral level 0, where you can be HIV positive and never, ever infect anybody. I know the science.
AIDS really terrified men from disclosing that they were bisexual because they didn't want to be seen as dangerous to women. And I still see it to this day. I'll see it on Reddit where women will be like, oh, I found out the guy I'm seeing is bisexual. And you can just read between the lines, like the fear and the like, am I going to get HIV now? That's the subtext. Even now, even today. So the film challenges traditional gender roles and expectations. So while the film doesn't explicitly address these themes, they've been widely discussed and analyzed by scholars and fans. And Mark Patton, the actor who played Jesse, is openly gay and has since become an advocate for the alphabet mafia to have better representation in horror cinema. Even without the character being explicitly gay and with him being closeted, just playing a character that was so effeminate in the mind of the 80s was enough to prevent him from being able to get roles that were like outside of that. So the power of the medium is pretty strong.
That's a hell of a lot. It kind of escaped me how much this impacted him as an actor afterwards, being cast in this kind of role. So that's The Final Girl.
That is the actual thesis. Next time someone's like, oh, like The Final Girl, unless they're talking about gender and identity and point of view, yeah, we get it. That's a stock character. But what does she mean? That was what I wanted to talk about in this episode, is like what that means. Also, I wanted to have that conversation around when things become a moral panic, and they're almost always centered around like entertainment and what young people are consuming, whatever pop culture it is. It's
alarming and wrong and weird. It's also very annoying. Even though I know the shit that I listened to when I was that age was also very weird and annoying. And I was even more annoying.
I think about stuff that I would listen to, and I mean, it's wild.
Hey, can I present one of my favorite modern final girls?
So I open my eyes now?
Her name is Cassandra. You can open your eyes.
Oh, from
Promising Young
Woman.
Yeah, that's my Halloween costume.
Oh my gosh, I love the wig.
Yeah,
really
I
cool.
threw it on last minute. I did nothing to prep it. I posted on my OnlyFans a picture just this week, and I was like, can you guess what my Halloween costume is? No, they could not.
So why is she your favorite final girl?
She's not my favorite final girl. She's just on my mind because I watched the film recently, and she's a survivor. What we don't see in her film is all of the victimization that happens to her friend in front of her. We see her like a decade or so later as an adult who is extracting her female revenge, her rape revenge, even though she was not the one who was raped. She is extracting this revenge on men in general, and then eventually the men who wronged her friend, who, spoiler alert, we don't know what happened to her. It's never actually defined. I love her because she is very much the rape revenge story. She's a survivor. She's the final girl in her personal story. She doesn't survive like the final girl does. I think the way that she dies is a more fulfilling narrative than if she had survived and not quite achieved what she wanted to.
Was her body burned in the movie?
Yeah.
I remember the movie. It's witchy. So there's also this thing of her friend was raped, but I saw that as violence to any woman is violence to every woman. The impact of it is felt by everyone.
Yeah.
And it ends with her, she's already dead, but they burn the body, which is much like a witch being burned at the stake.
Mm-hmm.
The overall message is that that's what the stakes are for women that stand up for themselves. Their fate is they are going to be burned at the stake for that.
I'm going to give a quick run through for our listeners and viewers, the film Promising Young Woman. It's about a woman who goes out in her free time in the evenings and pretends to be shit-faced wasted so that men will try to take her home to protect her from her own state of helplessness. And then these guys who fancy themselves nice guys end up trying to take sexually advantage of her. And she kind of shocks them by suddenly being perfectly clear-minded and sober and confronting them in the act of trying to rape her, whether it's what we think of in a scary, like 80s sense of rape, or a nice guy forcing himself on her in a way that he's bloviating about his own values.
Like a more friendly rape.
Yeah.
Like more,
neighborly.
A more jovial rape.
Yes. And so this is her thing. She terrifies the fuck out of these men. She puts herself in very dangerous situations because her best friend, when they were in med school, was raped. Nobody helped her. She dropped out. They both ended up dropping out. She dropped out to care for her friend who was so traumatized by this. We don't know what happened to the friend. We can only surmise that she probably killed herself. And so she does this as a way to work out her own mental challenges until she learns that the man and the men associated with the victimization of her best friend are somewhat accessible and living great lives and about to get married and just fucking killing it. And so then after somewhat resigning herself from this unhealthy practice, this unhealthy way of exploring her feelings, she gets a boyfriend. It seems pretty cool. And then she gets back into it. And then she learns that even the men you think you can like, even the good ones, are not very fucking good. It challenges the viewer to confront your own passive violence, the way that you passively permit sexual harassment and sexism and sexual violence around you. There's no stone unturned of the human psyche that doesn't reveal to you that passivity is violence. Passivity in the face of violence is further violence. And that's what the film says. There's this great final scene where she comes dressed up like a stripper to a bachelor party to ruin some men. Cassie, Promising Young Woman. Dig it.
There are things around the film that I thought were really interesting. And one of them was her murder is very uncomfortable to watch, but it's a soft kill. I also thought that the level of nihilism in the character is just not something that women characters normally display.
Are
like
allowed
that kind
to
of
display.
Yeah. That's a great. I hadn't really thought of it as a horror film, but it is a rape revenge movie. So I think we will talk about it again when we do the rape revenge genre, like at another point in time. My favorite final girl is Clarice Starling.
That's a great one.
From Silence of the Lambs. But only in Silence of the Lambs, not the follow-ups. Silence of the Lambs, in the original film, it's really funny. She is coded very masculine. For me, it's the final scene. I didn't care about her and Hannibal Lecter. What makes her my favorite final girl is when she is in the house and she realizes that this guy's the guy. And she knows the senator's daughter is in that house. And she can't bring herself to leave that woman. That whole sequence where she goes down into that basement with no backup, no idea what this guy has, because she can't leave that woman. She knows what's going to happen to her.
Yeah.
She's not in any danger, but she puts herself in danger because she can't stomach the idea of what's going to happen to that woman if she leaves. And that exchange, I've got you, Catherine. And she's like, don't leave me, you fucking bitch. There's something about that scene that I just love. And when she keeps chasing the guy and they're in that room and he puts on the night goggles and then shuts the door and we're with her where it's just blackness.
Yeah.
He can see her. She's in that night vision. She holds up the gun and you see her shaking. But the minute he fucking cocks his weapon, she just fucking knows and she gets him, right?
She was like, waiting for an invitation.
There was something about the way that fear is depicted in the film that seemed so accurate in a way that allowed for a woman to be strong in the way that women are strong.
Which is a strength we don't see. A lot of the strengths of femininity are seen as weakness or as inherent, not cultivated, not something that takes effort. With men, there's a lot of inherent masculine traits that we associate with perseverance and hard work.
Yeah.
Women, it's not quite the same thing.
So that's the final girl. We did it. We nailed it. We knocked it out of the park. We're stars. I think
we're kicking ass.
He's only gonna have to edit out like an hour. I think we're good.
We're great. We're great. Very grateful to Josh. Very grateful to you.
Yes. So let's do some housekeeping.
Follow us on social media. On Twitter, we are at illreputepod. On Instagram, we are at We Are Ill Repute. On TikTok, we are illreputepod. On Facebook, you can find us. Our page is illreputepod. You'll find us. On Blue Sky, we are illrepute.bisky.social, but just search for illrepute on Blue Sky. It's such a small platform. We're all just struggling to do our best on Blue Sky. And on YouTube, which you really should check out because the censored versions of the video of this podcast go on YouTube. The uncensored versions go into a file that we will release secretly when we want to. But that's our socials. Please.
And also you want to watch it because like you may not realize this, but in addition to being geniuses with amazing, sonorous, dulcet, sweet voices, we're also super, super good looking.
We're very babbly. Like a lot of people pay to masturbate to us on the internet.
Yeah, like we're hot. So like click on over to YouTube and
Yeah. And we have cool clothing and hair and makeup and everything. Like you should just, even if you're not trying to, look, we got something for everybody.
Yes.
Including your smartest friends. Tell your smart friends about us. Tell your dumb friends too, but tell your smart friends because your smart friends, if they're anything like my smart friends, are going to love us.
Hey, look, we pander to everyone. There's the smart stuff and shark. Also, you can get merch at importantadults.com. We have t-shirts and whatnot. And then just like other designs, because I just design t-shirts and stuff because I do that sometimes.
And they're very good. They're very good. Like half my wardrobe is your shirt.
I have some funny things to say.
I still need to buy a hoodie. I realize now that
Did you see that? Did you see the one I added that's the pipe by Magritte?
Oh yeah, I mean, bitch, I might be a fucking pipe.
Yeah.
That is the most sovereign shit I could fucking think of, you intellectual pansy.
I know, I'm the worst. Next week we will continue with Hedy Lamarr. We've got 2 more episodes of that, and then we are going to have some more episodes of another lady, but I'm not gonna say who
I'm
it
not
is,
sure which one it's gonna be because there's 2 contenders and they're both real badasses. But yes, we did get some Twitter responses like, wait, what about Hedy? Where's Hedy? But Hedy, and like I love that. Thank you for caring about our girl, my girl. We'll be back with Hedy part 3, and then the following week will be Hedy part 4, where we get into like the real meaty, cool, best shit. I just really wanted to do her the justice of covering her formative years before we get into the real badassery, because I'm gonna ignore a bunch of shit that like Google it. I don't care. She's an actress. Who cares? That's boring. She's a inventor, superstar.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So yeah, we're gonna get into that. We've got Phyllis Diller on deck. We've got Calamity Jane on deck.
Yes.
We've got the European witch hunts on deck. We got Susan Tyrell on deck. Like, we got a lot of stuff on deck. So
Ada
Yeah.
Lovelace and Maria Sabina are two that I'm putting some effort into.
And oh my God, your hair looks great. Oh. You guys, you have to watch on the YouTube because she took down her hair and she has this like beautiful blonde. Like she is highly rapeable.
Oh.
Because she's pale and blonde with blue eyes and they're big. And then she's tall, but she's slender.
Inoffensively tall.
Yeah. But like she can look vacant at times. And although she's a super genius, she kind of looks like she could be dumb as a box of rocks. And that is a rapeable quality right there. Like,
oh my gosh.
Like she looks like she would be shocked and stunned and unable to fight back. Like,
I am so good at being the shocked, stunned damsel who simply cannot fight back. Even though there's nothing tying my wrists, I somehow pretend like I'm tied down. Like, oh no.
I mean,
the air on my wrists is simply too much for me to contend with.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I often picture you and I'm like, I wonder what she'd look like tied up on my bed. You know?
Baby
like
girl.
I like it's just like my mind just goes there. You know? Like I just
love
see
you too.
and it's like
I think you're beautiful too. I'm romantically
like,
invested in you too, baby. Don't flirt with me in front of the audience. Thank you for joining us. Tell your smart friends to listen to us.
Tell your hot friends too.
Our audience is already really hot.
They must be.
They have to be.
They must
you are so... Has anybody told you today how becoming and stunning you look? Just very comely.
Really?
No, I'm talking to the audience. You look stunning and beautiful and shockingly
this is
sexual
the
and
time
gorgeous.
You got me
No, stop it.
The second time you got me in this episode, we're like I'm like, really? And then you're like, no.
Ho! I'm trying to talk to you about how beautiful you are. I'm not gonna dumb it down for the audience. The audience is so pretty, I'm sure. You are striking. You look like you just walked out of an oil painting to ruin men's days and to hug people. I am always reflecting your fucking sunshine, you dumb cunt. I hate it.
Meow, meow.
You're too pretty.
You know
I
what?
hate it.
All right. I think we did it.
That's a whole podcast.
Bye.
Bye.